Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us during Florida Shines Virtual College Week. My name is Nashla Daware, and I will be facilitating today's session, Financial Aid is for You. And today, you'll learn to separate myths from facts and explore all financial aid options to help you pay for your education. Now, before we begin, I want to go over a few items with you. If you have any questions, please put them in the question box and we will address them during the live Q&A at the end of the presentation. Now, because of the nature of this topic, we ask that you do not provide personal information as part of your question. And if you have a question that's very specific, we may need to follow up with you individually after the webinar. Closed captioning is provided for this session by clicking on the link provided in the chat box. This session will be recorded and available along with all the materials shared today at floridashines.org. And finally, we are live on Twitter, so feel free to share your comments and connect with us at FL Shines. Thank you. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Mia Mwango. Mia is the Financial Aid Director at Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida. She enjoys experiencing firsthand the important work that financial aid professionals do as a mission to provide access to education while balancing the needs of students, institutions, as well as state and federal government. Mia, this is always such a popular topic for our students, and it really applies every year that you are enrolled in a college or university. So we're honored to have you. We're excited to learn how to get started in the financial aid process. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and sharing the information. Okay. So, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I have control here. So let's go ahead and jump in. Again, she said, my name is Camilla Mwango, Director of Financial Aid. And as Director of Financial Aid, you kind of do everything. You wear many hats, and one of them is to talk directly to students and parents and community members about financial aid and making sure that everyone feels comfortable with the process. So I'm going to be talking to you kind of like I would be talking to any student or parent in front of me and trying to make it a little bit more conversational. So if you have questions, and like she said, please just type them out and we'll get to them as we go along. So the overall financial aid process, it sounds scary when someone says financial aid. You're thinking FAFSAs and forms and taxes and numbers and lots of things that people really just don't want to deal with. But it doesn't have to be a tedious process. It's really kind of simple when you break it down a little bit. So we're going to go over all of these in depth over the course of the presentation, but this is just an overview. And you'll notice that the first thing to do is to submit your FAFSA. So we'll be starting with that topic first. All right, so there's different types of financial aid, and I mentioned the FAFSA. The different types of financial aid can be based on academic achievement, or what we call merit-based, or it could be based on financial need, what we call need-based. The FAFSA is need-based, and that's the one that most people need a little bit of help with. Then, there's different forms, there's different things to make sure you have the income levels that qualify for the need-based financial aid. Academic or merit-based financial aid, those are your scholarships and different things. So when we're talking about this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the need-based, like the FAFSA, but we will be encompassing some of the other types just to make sure that folks know that that's out there and know that there's a process for it. So, financial aid. We talked about need-based, we talked about merit-based, and even within those categories, there's different categories. So you have your scholarships and your grants, which are gift aid. Those are the ones that most folks want because they don't have to be paid back. And then you have self-help aid, which is your student loans. And sometimes employment, like federal work study. And these types of aids can come from different sources. And if you're like me, when I was in school, I didn't really care that much where it came from, but you do need to know because there are different levels. When we're talking about federal financial aid, your Pell Grant and things like that, that is an option, and that's the form that you'll be filling out. It's just a FAFSA. But you can look for additional sources on the state, the local, institutional, or private level too. So just be aware that there's more sources out there for you when you're planning finances for college. Okay, so federal financial aid. This is the FAFSA. Most of you have heard of that, and FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. When you fill out that one application, you are applying for all of these different types of financial aid. You're applying for federal grants like the Pell Grant. A lesser known grant is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which is not all schools get the same amount of money, so it is a limited supply of money. You have to usually apply early to get those. At some schools, many schools, you're also applying just by filling out the FAFSA for some state grants and for some institutional money. At our school, we do award automatically anything that a student's eligible for, and that FAFSA application is the basis for us awarding all of our aid. So we talked about ways to pay. There are some listed here. This is a sample of our schools page. Under financial aid, you'll see, as I mentioned on the last slide, there's grants, there's employment, which is work study, there's loans, and there's scholarships. But there's also other things like scholarships from outside resources, and there's waivers and exemptions, dual enrollment. If your student has participated in dual enrollment, that is a great program, a great way to cut the cost of college by taking college courses while you're still in high school. So there's a lot of different ways to pay for college. Florida Prepaid, you mentioned here, and you'll want to take a look at your school's website and see what information they have for you as you begin to plan your finances. Okay, if you're overwhelmed and you're thinking, wow, there's so many options, there's so many things to research, what do I need to do next? So you start with the FAFSA at fafsa.ed.gov. There used to be a lot of FAFSA.com websites and other websites that would take your information, have you pay for certain, helping you fill it out. They've cut down on that, but you still need to make sure you're going to the correct website so that you don't have your information going to a not legitimate place or stealing your credit card info. It stands for free, so that's one indicator. If you are paying for something or putting in payment information, that is probably not the website. So make sure you're going to the free application for federal student aid. This is probably the biggest piece of information that I'll give you today. There's a new FAFSA date. So if you have been involved as a guidance counselor, as a parent of multiple children going to school, or if you've heard from a friend that the FAFSA opens in January, well, they moved the date back. The FAFSA now opens October 1st, preceding the academic year you want to attend school. So if you're a high school senior and you're going to college next year in the fall, you'll want to fill out the FAFSA now so that you have that early FAFSA application date and may qualify for additional financial aid. So that's really important to know that it has changed, and that was within the last couple years. So how do you prepare for the FAFSA? Again, we've heard horror stories of you need stacks of records and everything that you could possibly get together to fill out the FAFSA. Well, it's true that you do need some information and some documents with you, but you can streamline that a little bit by going, out on the website and typing in FAFSA checklist or FAFSA documents or what do I need to fill out the FAFSA. And you'll see here that it's not too comprehensive. You do need your Social Security number for the student and parents if they're dependent. You need your federal income tax returns. And this is also a different a change. It's not last year's tax returns, it's 2 years prior, what we call prior year, because we're using for example, this year we're using 2015 data for 2017. So a lot of parents would be scrambling, trying to file their taxes so they could do their FAFSA or using estimates and not quite knowing where they stood as far as income, and it was very difficult. So now we're using 2 years prior, and that information should be already available to most families. And it's a much more streamlined process because folks aren't having to scramble. And one way to streamline this process even more and not have to have your income tax returns is to do the data retrieval tool, which is right there within the application. It will go out, request your information directly from the IRS, and import it into your FAFSA. So it'll bring that data in for you, and you don't have to manually put it in your FAFSA application. You'll also need your FSA ID and your parents' FSA ID. If you look in your handouts that are available via the webinar resources, there's a resource for you called Creating and Using the FSA ID. You'll want to go ahead and do this before, you want to go ahead and do this before you start the FAFSA application, just to prepare for signatures, because sometimes creating the FSA ID can take a couple days. So it's really important to get that process started. You'll also need your untaxed income, bank statements, and you'll need a list of schools you're considering just to make it easier for you. Once you're in the application, you don't have to think, you can have your schools right there handy. So save this slide, print it out, or you can Google, or search for how to prepare for the FAFSA or what documents you need for the FAFSA. It'll be really handy as you go to complete it. So why are you filling out the FAFSA? Why do they need all of my income information? What are they doing with it? Filling out the FAFSA, putting all that income information and somewhat personal information is to come up with financial need. The government has a limited amount of money that it's allocated for education and for helping students with their college expenses. So not everyone gets the maximum amount of money available. It's allocated to students based on need. The FAFSA, and where that comes in and where your financial aid or your financial income information comes in, is the expected family contribution. We have each school has a cost of attendance, and you can find that on their website. It may be $15,000 a year. It could be $60,000 or $70,000 a year. It depends on which institution you choose and what their pricing structure is. But the FAFSA helps the the federal government determine how much your family needs to contribute towards that institution's cost. And then you come up with financial need. That's what's left. The financial need says that there's a gap here between what the family can be expected to provide and what the cost of their institution is. So we're able to help with that gap a little bit. To further kind of look at what the EFC is, it's not a direct number that you're expected to pay. So for example, a family may have an expected contribution of $1,200. Now that's a number that's spit out after a formula. It's not what you're expected to come up with in cash. So that's another question that some of our families have. When they finish their FAFSA, you get your EFC directly from the federal government, and it's a number. And they think, well, gosh, I don't have $1,200 or I don't have $2,300. That's a formulaic number, and it's not what you're expected to come out of pocket for. And again, you'll get that number directly from the federal government, from the FAFSA, and the school gets that number as well. And then the school uses it to establish what kind of financial resources they have based on various allocations from the federal government, the state, from the institution. Now, this number is set in stone, so you can't go back and negotiate with the federal government or with the school. It's a formula established by federal law, and it's based on your household size, your number in college, and then that income and asset information that you put on the FAFSA. So, at most schools, you will get some sort of notice, either in the mail or by email, that they've received your FAFSA information. And you'll want to respond. If they ask you, hey, we've gotten your FAFSA information, we need you to turn in a few more documents, or we need you to accept your award, or let us know your enrollment decision, make sure you follow up with whatever the school's asking. Usually it's an online student portal. For example, at our school, we have a student portal. We will provide notifications via email that there's something that you need to take action on in that student portal. Most schools, I think, are going towards the portal, so make sure that you have your logins and all of that information at the school level, as well as doing the FAFSA, so you get that important information that comes after the FAFSA. Usually the FAFSA isn't the last step in getting your financial aid at your school. You'll also want to make sure your high school transcripts, or if you're a transfer student, your college transcripts are on file with the financial aid office. Other documents that they may be asking for. So you'll need to check on that, and it's a process. You may check it one day and turn in everything, and then there's a requirement either at the state level or the federal level for the office to ask you for something else. You want to make sure you follow up and then keep checking and turning in all the documents that the office is asking for. So here's just a sample of a school's portal. You can see where you can view awards if you're at that stage in the process, or authorize certain transactions. There's just various information on different student portals, and they look different. But the main takeaway is that you'll want to be looking at your financial aid status. And here's a verification screen. Now, verification, I haven't touched on it much because the plain language term for verification is just that you need to turn in documents. But the process is where the federal government requires the school to go in and verify that what you put on the FAFSA is actually accurate information. So it's not that the school is trying to make it difficult, or that they are just asking for additional documents because, it's bureaucracy. They're actually, required by federal law to do this process if you're selected. So again, that student portal is going to be extremely important, so you know which documents you need to turn in. A lot of schools will post blank forms on a portal or on a website. You don't want to go out and grab all of those forms and try to fill them in. You'll want to pay attention to what forms the office is actually asking you for, and make sure you turn those specific ones. Providing more information or less information than the office asks for can delay you getting your financial aid decision. At many schools, you can also charge books against your estimated financial aid awards. So this student doesn't have books, but you can see their awards here, and they have additional athletic awards. So your package is going to look different. Each student is going to get different amounts of money based on their FAFSA information, or like we talked about, merit-based need. This athletic award is a merit-based scholarship. You can look at your handouts, the first and second one, that talks about the details of the Pell Grant, subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans. So if you're curious about what those are, that's detailed in those handouts. And in the interest of time, we're going to kind of glance at those, but those resources are there for explanation. Now, one thing I did want to touch on is your degree audit and your schedule. That is important for financial aid because the laws have changed. It's not your financial aid from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You can only take classes within your degree, and you have to stay on track. And we'll talk about why that's important in a minute. This is just a sample. Different schools will tell you that your courses aren't counting towards your degree in different ways. At our school, it's a red message. It's pretty self-explanatory. Hey, this isn't going to count for your financial aid, but you may want to check with your school to see how they tell you that. This is mostly reference for when you download the slides. When each school has a last day to drop with a refund or last day to add drop, the Pell Grant classes have to be added before this date. So that's just something to know, to keep in the back of your mind. Make sure that you're staying on top of deadlines and doing things within the time frame. Disbursements are when you get actual money in hand. So that's when the financial aid process runs. We send the money, the okay to the business office or the cashier's office to pay out cash money. Well, it's not usually cash anymore. There's different ways to get dispersed, but just realize that you're not going to get money immediately, so you need to budget for that. You need to budget for about 3 weeks into the semester getting funds. I got ahead of myself. So your tuition and fees come out once you authorize it. Book charges are taken out, and then you get what's left. So also be paying attention to, if you haven't done the residency process, you may want to do that because in-state residents get charged less tuition than out-of-state, and there's a process you have to go through to do that. So if you don't do the residency process and you're getting charged that extra tuition amount, you may not get a financial aid refund back to you, in your bank account because it's all been taken up by tuition. So make sure you're paying attention to your charges and the process there. Another thing to look out for, or a topic to be aware of, is satisfactory academic progress. Now, this trips up a lot of students once they get to school. So that you fill out the FAFSA, you've gotten, all your documents turned in, you've done everything on that end, but now you've got to meet certain requirements like maintaining a 2.0 GPA and passing your courses. So we can go through the details, but the slide is there for you. Just know that there are some academic requirements that you have to meet, and that includes not dropping classes or withdrawing. Again, this slide is here for your reference for you to read later, but it does affect your financial aid when you do those. So we've talked about all of these steps, and it's not that challenging once you break it down. You'll want to submit your FAFSA, apply for admission for your school, get your high school diploma, GPA, or your GED, or your transcript sent in. If you're selected for verification, turn in your documents, and keep checking your student portal. You want to attend classes. That's kind of a given, but maintain the academic level, standards of progress. Make sure you're taking your classes and not dropping them or failing them. Then you'll get your financial aid disbursement, which is money back to you in your account. And then after you've kind of done that life cycle, remember to reapply every year. The FAFSA doesn't roll over from year to year. You'll need to apply every single year as early as October 1st. And then, of course, stay on track with your degree so you can walk across that stage. A lot of these slides are here kind of as FAQs at the end of the presentation. So you're welcome to look through these, but just know to go to your school's website and to download those resources that we have here on the webinar as backup, so you can get details. We hear the phrase in financial aid all the time, but nobody told me that. There's so much to know. Please make sure you're using your resources. And that's it for this portion of the presentation. I think we're going to turn it over for questions.
Thank you so much, Camilla. Absolutely. So we'd like to invite our audience to send in any general questions that you have related to the presentation. And as we prepare for those questions, Camilla, thank you for sharing all the details and breaking down this process. I just want to reiterate one of the important pieces from your presentation related to the FAFSA, October 1st, right? And so if you're a senior graduating in May of 2018, October 1st should be a very important date on your calendar. Camilla, our first question is exactly related to that. Does it help to submit the FAFSA as early as possible?
Yes, it does help to submit the FAFSA as early as possible. It opens in October 1st, and sometimes we have students that do it October 1st or 2nd. The idea is that students can qualify for additional funds if they can fill out the FAFSA early and kind of get ahead of other students, because some funds are limited.
Thank you. Camilla, our next question is related to major changes. So what happens when student is in a situation where they currently, or their parents currently make only a small portion of the income that they were making, say, 2 years ago? So if there has been a major financial income change in their family, how can they address that with the FAFSA to make sure that they're still receiving what they need to receive to help pay for their education?
Yes, that's an excellent question, and one I didn't quite get to in the presentation, but there is a process for special circumstances. The technical term for it is professional judgment, but you can also use the term, a special circumstance appeal or a special circumstance review. That will allow the financial aid office to reconsider your income if it's different from before and make some adjustments to certain things in your application. So you'll just want to contact your financial aid office and ask them to review your situation.
Okay, that's very good to know that there's still some options for them to make adjustments to that piece. Camilla, I know you shared some examples of financial aid portals and student portals and degree audits that students can look at. Do you have to be accepted as a student of an institution in order to have access to that portal and see the financial aid awards that you've been given?
It varies from school to school. Some schools will show you information when you have filled out the application. Some schools will show you information when you're accepted. Some schools will show you, as soon as you make a login and you put them on the FAFSA. So it just really depends on the school as to what they show you on that portal at what time.
Okay, so that depends on the school. Very good to know. Now, for students who are wondering, is it a good idea to go after merit-based and need-based financial aid? Is one better than the other? Should they go after both types of financial aid? What is your recommendation?
Well, I always encourage students to apply for as many different sources of financial aid as possible. Now, depending on your situation, you may not be able to get everything that you've been awarded. There is a limit. So each student has a budget amount for the federal government, and you can only receive up to that amount. But it's definitely better to exceed that amount than to come in under it and not have everything that might have been available. So I would say need-based and merit-based are, both equally good, and definitely encourage everyone to apply for either one.
Okay, absolutely. And you mentioned this briefly in your presentation, Camilla, but can you tell our audience a little bit more about how Pell Grants work?
Absolutely. So the Pell Grant is one of those awards that gets allocated based on your FAFSA application. And you fill out the FAFSA, you put in your income, your household information, and remember that EFC number. That's important because that's what determines if you get a Pell Grant or how much of a Pell Grant you are eligible for. So that putting in that income and household information is really important in making sure it's accurate. Once you're awarded the Pell Grant from the school, that's based, it's based on that EFC number that the school will receive, you'll look on your award letter to see how much you've actually been allocated based on your information. The Pell Grant is not required to be paid back. So it's different than a loan in that it's actually gift aid, free to you, no interest, no requirement to repay. Does that explain a little bit?
Yeah, certainly a good first option before accepting loans if that's an option they have. Absolutely, and we'll follow up with any follow-up questions related to that if they come up, Camilla. This question comes up quite a bit. Should students ever pay for any type of assistance filling out the FAFSA or applying to scholarships? Is there any fees related to that should they be paying?
I would say absolutely not. There are, for the FAFSA, you definitely don't pay. That is a federal website, and it is free for anyone to apply. The scholarships options, sometimes there are some that are legitimate and are paid, but there are so many that are free that I encourage everyone to do the free ones first before potentially compromising your personal information or your credit card information on a site that may or may not be legitimate.
Okay, and so outside of the scholarship search under the financial aid office or department for a particular institution, is there a website that you typically recommend students use for scholarship search?
We used to recommend FastWeb, and it's still a pretty good website. It's robust. There's several that have popped up over the years, and some of them change. But FastWeb seems to be a go-to from year to year, so that's definitely one of my top recommendations. Okay,
great. Now, for students who are thinking about programs like the 2+2, if they begin at a 2-year college and they want to transfer, how do scholarships work? Does it vary by the scholarship and its eligibility requirements? Is it the same across the board? Can they transfer that award over to the university?
There's different scholarships and Florida prepaid. They are governed by their own kind of contract or rules, and they change depending on what year you purchase the plan or what year you're receiving the scholarship. So for some people, they are transferable. For most people, they are transferable, but you'll want to pay attention to the fine print and the details and the award or the plan that you're actually in or have received.
Okay, certainly paying attention to not just the eligibility requirements, but like you said, what it takes to keep the scholarship afterwards. Yesterday we learned about Bright Futures and the Florida financial aid application, and so students learned that in addition to the FAFSA, there's the Florida financial aid application for Bright Futures and a few other Florida-specific awards. Anything you want to share, thoughts or recommendations related to that?
Well, I definitely say the Florida application, it is a separate application, but the funds that are awarded through the school from the state are, again, based on that early FAFSA application date. So it's just another chance for me to remind folks to fill out the FAFSA as early as possible so you can qualify for those additional funds. The state does give us funds, and it's not actually tied to that state application. It's kind of money that we can allocate, but we don't have enough for every single student, so we do it in a fair way based on early application date. So just another plug for that to be done early.
Thank you, Camilla. Definitely, again, such an intricate process, but it's nice to be able to break it down. And I think if students plan early and start early, it makes a world of difference to be prepared and to ensure they're being eligible for the most opportunities there. So I want to thank you again for sharing such a wealth of resources and information today. As a reminder to our audience, the recorded session, along with all the materials that she shared today, will be available on floridashines.org. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Finishing Strong and how parents can help the process, join us next at 5 and 6 o'clock Eastern this afternoon, and you can sign up for all the Virtual College Week live webinars at floridashines.org. Again, thank you, Camilla, for all your information today, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.